The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We are going to talk about tonight's vice presidential debate, but first we need to finish talking about last week's presidential debate. The big question about the first presidential debate last week was not so much who won the debate, which is a more amorphous question, but the measurable question of how did that debate affect polling. A ton of right-wingers have been tweeting me links to these bogus Insta online polls like the drudgereport.com poll, some of them showing that Donald Trump won really big. One of them said Trump won 80-20. Listen, not only are those internet polls obviously not scientific in any way, the results don't even pass the laugh test based on just an understanding of how polarized politics is in the United States right now. Nobody won that debate 80-20 in any serious manner. So we've been waiting for polling numbers from actual pollsters, and now we have them, okay? In four-way polling, which includes Libertarian Gary Johnson and Green Party presidential candidate Jill Stein, Hillary Clinton is defeating Donald Trump in, listen to this, 9 out of 9 post-debate polls. These are polls done where all surveying of voters happened after that first debate. Let's take a look at a screenshot from realclearpolitics.com. As you can see here, dating back to a Rasmussen results poll from starting the day of the debate, which had Hillary Clinton +1, you will see that Hillary Clinton is leading every single one of these polls by a margin of somewhere between 1 and 6 percentage points, an average, according to Real Clear Politics, of 3.7 percentage points. Very solid numbers for Hillary Clinton, but you don't win or lose the presidential election in the United States based on national popular vote, because we have an electoral vote system. You need 270 electoral votes to become president of the United States. So next, let's look at the updated election forecast from Nate Silver's 538.com. As of this morning, you will see he estimates Hillary Clinton has roughly a 72% chance of becoming the next president of the United States. Donald Trump has a roughly 28% chance of becoming president of the United States. Gary Johnson has somewhere between a below 0.1 and 1% chance of becoming president of the United States. Now, the interesting thing, if we can put that one back up just for a second, if you look, I don't know, must be 10 days ago. Basically, if you look at this right before that first presidential debate, you see that Hillary Clinton's chance of winning trailed off from mid-August in a very acute and steep fashion until that first presidential debate, at which point Hillary Clinton's chance of winning the national election has increased, according to 538.com. And lastly, I want to show you the state-by-state polling map from electoral-vote.com. This takes state-by-state polls and tells us what do these add up to in terms of electoral votes. Interestingly here, Hillary Clinton ahead in Florida, but Donald Trump ahead in Ohio, an important state. 323 to 215 is the current estimate from electoral-vote.com. Look at North Carolina in that map. North Carolina in the blue camp for Hillary Clinton right now. Unclear if that will stay. If it does, I think we will likely have Gary Johnson to thank there. Currently, Hillary Clinton leads Trump by about 2 percentage points in North Carolina. Gary Johnson is polling 7% there, and there is no doubt that if Gary Johnson were not running, the lion's share of his 7% would not go to Hillary Clinton. It would go to Donald Trump. So if Hillary Clinton ends up winning North Carolina on November 8th, we may have Gary Johnson to thank. It would be great to have Gary Johnson to thank for something, because right now, I guess we can thank him for 2 cringeworthy moments where he exposed he either has significant memory problems or just doesn't know a lot of stuff. Will tonight's vice presidential debate change these numbers? I say it's very unlikely. Typically, unless someone does something really outrageously bad in a vice presidential debate, you were not going to see any big impact. Although the one thing that crossed my mind is Donald Trump is so incompetent and clueless on every issue that in comparison, Mike Pence is going to seem like a knowledgeable guy. Now, his positions are bonkers, off the wall, insane, but compared to Trump, he may actually seem to know something. And that, Pat, might, I guess, make it so some undecided voters, I don't know how you can be undecided right now, say, hey, you know what? I was worried about Trump because he doesn't know anything. But Pence seems to at least be aware of some stuff. So maybe I'll vote for him because I really don't like Hillary. I don't know. I'm reaching pretty deep here.
Yeah, you are. I think if the pressure's on anyone, it is on Mike Pence, because he has to overcome Trump's first debate performance, which was reviewed by pretty much everyone as lackluster.
Yeah, except for people who voted on drudgereport.com, to the extent that that matters. I honestly don't understand being undecided at this point. It's a month before the race. How can you still be undecided? And sometimes undecideds wear their undecidedness like a badge of honor, suggesting or implying that they're somehow better. They're really taking their time to evaluate who to vote for. How can you possibly be undecided at this point? I truly don't get that. Okay, let's talk about the total lack of coherence and logic behind Donald Trump's multiple explanations about that New York Times report, which explained, hey, you know what? In 1995, Donald Trump reported a $916 million loss on his 1995 taxes. He initially said that makes him smart, right? So let's really go through this in a logical manner. You see this $916 million loss on Trump's 1995 tax returns. Potentially, Donald Trump could have used that loss to then offset federal taxes he would have had to pay in up to the following 18 years, and maybe not paid federal taxes for nearly 2 decades following this. We don't know that because we don't have Donald Trump's taxes. We just don't have them. We don't know. The initial reaction from Trump when he was accused of not paying federal taxes by Hillary Clinton in the first debate was to say, that makes me smart. I'll remind you what that looked and sounded like.
Or maybe he doesn't want the American people, all of you watching tonight, to know that he's paid nothing in federal taxes, because the only years that anybody's ever seen were a couple of years when he had to turn them over to state authorities when he was trying to get a casino license, and they showed he didn't pay any federal income tax. So if he's paid zero.
Yeah, so that's Trump's initial spin. I have no doubt that those are his true feelings. Trump thinks he's pretty clever because he's figured out a way not to pay taxes. Now, not paying taxes doesn't make you smart. It makes you a freeloader. That's exactly what it makes you in a literal sense. That's okay. Doesn't play too well with voters, clearly. So Donald Trump has been spinning it a different way. He now is saying that his inside knowledge of the tax code and how to game it actually makes him qualified to be president. Here's a tweet that Donald Trump sent out recently where he said, I know our complex tax laws better than anyone who has ever run for president and am the only one who can fix them. Okay, well, that's something to think about at least, right? Trump has taken advantage of these tax loopholes for the rich, and he knows exactly how they could be changed and fixed. What's the problem with that statement? Well, the problem is we've seen Donald Trump's tax plan, and it would do absolutely nothing to fix these problems. Trump's tax plan wouldn't close the loophole that would have allowed him to avoid paying taxes for many years. Trump's tax plan would, by and large, give the largest windfalls to the highest earners, including people in the top 0.1%. And Donald Trump's tax plan would repeal the estate tax, which would only affect a tiny minority of the wealthiest people and families in the U.S. And by the way, an analysis from an organization called Third Way concluded that Donald Trump's own family would be one of that teeny tiny percentage of families that would benefit from Donald Trump repealing the estate tax, to the tune, by the way, of a $7 billion benefit. If Donald Trump is going to make the argument that by having taken advantage of these laws himself, he will know how to fix them, he needs to make a proposal to fix them. His actual tax proposal would make these laws even more favorable to the richest of the rich. So this does not pass the laugh test. And then we always get to the question, Why do people who will never, ever, ever even come close to being in a position to benefit from these laws, why would they ever support someone like Donald Trump? Well, I think part of it is the idea that they probably believe I too one day may be rich enough to benefit from this type of nonsense. Statistically speaking, most of those people will not. And some of it may be that they're influenced by these ideas of, hey, he's successful and he is taking advantage of the law as he sees it, and he is going to make the law even better for himself. And because he's rich, he's good, because that's something that there's a lot in American culture that is tied into, if you figured out a way to make a ton of money, you are good and you should be applauded. Unfortunately, we know that that is not true. Major news that is not being widely reported by corporate media about Donald Trump's Trump Foundation. This is his charitable organization. It has been effectively shut down by the New York Attorney General. It hasn't actually been closed, but yesterday we learned that New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman ordered Donald Trump's personal charity to stop all fundraising activities after it was determined that the organization was in violation of state law because they were soliciting donations without proper authorization to do so. This was conveyed in a, quote, notice of violation that was sent a few days ago to the Donald J. Trump Foundation. The night before, the Washington Post had actually reported that the foundation did not properly register with the state as a charity to solicit money. And now the Trump Foundation needs to do all sorts of stuff to get back in good standing and be able to resume fundraising activities. They need to provide financial audit reports. And if they don't comply, they will be considered to be a, quote, continuing fraud upon the people of New York. Naturally, no surprise to anybody, the Trump campaign is implying that this is all politically motivated. Trump campaign spokeswoman Hope Hicks put out a written statement, and she said, I love the wording on this, while we remain very concerned about the political motives behind Attorney General Schneiderman's investigation, the Trump Foundation nevertheless intends to fully cooperate with the investigation. Yeah, I mean, it's true. New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman has endorsed Hillary Clinton in the presidential race. Note that, as we've reported to you before, Donald Trump's own money hasn't even been in this charitable organization for a long time. I believe that the last time he donated, it's either anything or anything of significant value to the foundation was 2008. And since it's basically been using other people's money for political posturing, political gain, et cetera, this entire thing is clearly one of the Donald Trump-esque scams that he is involved in. He is using this money to take political advantage. He is using other people's money that, I don't know if when some of these rich people donated to the Trump Foundation, they donated thinking that the money really was going to be used for true charitable contributions. Or maybe they donated expecting or knowing that, listen, this is just a front. Really what this money is used for is to buy political favors, to donate to Pam Bondi in Florida to make an investigation about Trump University go away. I don't know what the organization donors knew or expected, but what I do know is there is no evidence at all that this is a charitable organization that is even remotely close to being on the up and up. And now we are seeing every indication that all of our suspicions about this charitable foundation are absolutely true. Projection once again, right? Trump going on and on for weeks. It's the Clinton Foundation that's the problem. Turns out that it's Trump's own charity that has no short list of its own problems. Send me your thoughts about this. I'm on Twitter at dpacman, and the show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Anthony Del Aquila. Anthony, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. Our program is viewer and listener supported. And I invite you to sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. If you ever shop on amazon.com, remember to first visit davidpakman.com/Amazon. And lastly, tomorrow, Wednesday, October 5th, we will be taking your calls live at 1:15 p.m. Eastern Time. The number will be 617-830-4750. Make a little calendar reminder. Call in. We would love to hear from you. Okay, there is much hubbub being made over some hacked audio recordings of a private conversation that Hillary Clinton had with campaign donors months ago. And I'm going to play the audio for you. A lot of people are emailing me saying, David, it's shocking what Hillary says here. She says that she is occupying both the center left and the center right. This is absolutely insane. And when I heard it, when I listened to the audio that I'll play for you, I thought, well, yeah, we've been saying for years that Hillary Clinton is one of the more moderate or center-right Democrats that are around. This is exactly what I would predict Hillary Clinton says. So let's take a listen to the audio, and then we'll dig into it.
It is important to recognize what's going on in this election. Everybody who's ever been in any election that I'm aware of is quite bewildered because there is a strain of, on the one hand, a kind of populist, nationalist, xenophobic, discriminatory kind of approach that we hear too much of from the Republican candidates. And on the other side, there's just a deep desire to believe that, we can have free college, free health care, that what we've done hasn't gone far enough and we just need to, go as far as, Scandinavia, whatever that means. And half the people don't know what it means, but it is something that they deeply feel. So as a friend of mine said the other day, I am occupying from the center left to the center right. And I don't have much company there because it is difficult when you're running to be president and you understand how hard the job is. I don't want to overpromise. I don't want to tell people things that I know we cannot do. I want to level with the American people.
Was this some major secret, right? Nobody would have known that Hillary Clinton is sort of center left, center right without somebody hacking into a phone to get audio. I mean, this is just not shocking. This is what I've been saying for years about Hillary Clinton. And I don't agree with her that she doesn't have company occupying the center left to the center right. The neoconservative pro-business Republicans they're not in favor of progressive positions on social issues, but they're sort of indifferent about restricting people's actions when it comes to social issues beyond saying some basic things to raise money from evangelicals. They are not that far from Hillary Clinton. Here's what center left and center right are code for in American politics, okay? Center left means I want to be seen as progressive, but I'm basically a status quo campaign finance and crony capitalist insider. And I want to keep it that way while appearing progressive. And in order to do that, I will support a somewhat higher minimum wage. I'll talk about equality. I'll make some improvements to social welfare programs, etc. That's what center left is code for. Center right is code for, I'm not one of these religious nut Republicans. I'm not a social conservative. I don't have these outrageously black and white views on the economy or foreign affairs, but I'm basically a standard neoliberal on war. I'm slightly hawkish. I support the military industrial complex, and on foreign policy, I'm basically, neoliberal. That's what center left and center right mean in practice in modern politics. And these are codes, Pat, that we now have to understand and interpret. And there's nothing, of course, this is where Hillary is on the spectrum.
Yeah, and this isn't really too surprising. I mean, we know that Hillary Clinton's going to do whatever is politically expedient.
Yeah.
She didn't come around on marriage equality until 2013. She initially supported the TPP until dropping it when it became unpopular. And I think it really hurts her on the issue of authenticity. Yeah,
no doubt about it. And it's reflected in the polls, right? No matter how cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs you think Donald Trump is, we know that Hillary Clinton, as you pointed out last week, struggles on the honest and trustworthiness. We know that on some issues, she still has trouble within the polling. And mainstream media, corporate media, I'm sorry, I try not to use the term mainstream media, basically has not been touching this. And we also have to remember that the country on social issues and on issues of just basic taxation. Should we have progressive or regressive taxation in the country? Inequality, should inequality be reduced if we can do it? The country has moved to the left, but we still have the status quo politicians, which have really stayed in the middle. And whether you call it center left, center, or center right, it almost doesn't matter, right? The difference between a very moderate Democrat and a very moderate Republican is negligible. What they say might vary because of the constituencies they're trying to raise money from, but practically speaking, their views are going to be very, very similar. So to me, zero surprise in what Hillary Clinton's leaked audio here reveals. Hey, here's something fascinating going on with the Donald Trump taxes and charitable giving scandal. Back in mid-September, the co-founder of LinkedIn, Reid Hoffman, announced a major fundraising campaign where he put in $5 million. He pledged $5 million of his own money, which would be donated to veterans charities if Donald Trump released his tax returns. That $5 million was then used to crowdfund, and more than another $1 million has been crowdfunded. So now, with over 10,000 pledges and Reid Hoffman's $5 million, we are at over $6 million available to veterans groups if Donald Trump releases his taxes. The money will be divided up among 10 veterans groups. The cost to Donald Trump, well, the financial cost would be zero. The political cost to releasing his taxes, it seems like it would be pretty big from everything that we're learning. The Pat Tillman Foundation, the Hire Heroes USA charity, Team Rubicon, the Yellow Ribbon Fund, just some of the 10 charities that would benefit here. And the donors who pledge money are told, and it says very clearly on the crowdfunding website, you will only be charged if Trump releases his taxes. Every president since Nixon has released their tax returns. We need to see Trump's tax returns. I don't know if we will. Here's, again, as a reminder, some of what we suspect could be revealed by Donald Trump's taxes. First on the list, that Donald Trump has Russian ties that are much more extensive than what we believe now, or what has been admitted anyway. Number two, that Donald Trump is being audited. And again, that's a bogus reason. That's the reason Trump says he's not releasing the tax returns, but we know that that's not really a reason not to. Number three, that he didn't pay any taxes. We have much reason to believe that that is true after the New York Times release. Number four, that Trump has ties to the mob. Number five, that he donates no or very little money to charity. And number six, that he is not as rich as he says he is. I have to tell you, Pat, with every passing day, I am more convinced that at least some, if not all, of the possibilities on this list are true.
Yeah, it could be all of the above. And what I love is how this kind of turned on its head the offer that Trump made to Obama.
Right.
That if he released his birth certificate, Trump would offer $5 or $50 million to charity.
Yeah, and ultimately Trump didn't. Do we know why Trump didn't donate the money? Was it because he said the birth certificate is not legit? I actually don't remember why he ended up not donating.
He gave a deadline for it.
Oh, okay. So Obama released the birth certificate, but maybe didn't meet the completely artificial and arbitrary deadline that Trump established. It must be really, really bad if at this point Donald Trump is not releasing his tax returns. This is taking a political toll. There is no doubt about it. A majority of those polled want to see the tax returns. Every little bit of data we get, like the 1995 tax return obtained by the New York Times, suggests that the suspicions about Trump's taxes are absolutely true. How bad could it really be? We might never know. At this point, 30-something days before the election, Trump hasn't released them so far. I can't imagine that he will. Okay, very important news involving the new law, the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, known as JASTA for short. This is the law that President Obama vetoed recently, but that veto was then overridden by the House and Senate, and what it allows is for victims of 9/11 in the United States, families of victims of 9/11 in the United States, to sue Saudi Arabia, and then it would be evaluated whether or not Saudi Arabia provided material support to some of the perpetrators of the 9/11 attacks, which, as we know, were overwhelmingly from Saudi Arabia. Well, Stephanie Ross DeSimone and her 14-year-old daughter, Alexandra, are now the first to sue Saudi Arabia under the new law allowing these lawsuits. Prior to JASTA passing, U.S. citizens could only sue Sudan, Syria, and Iran in the event of a terrorist attack carried out by those states. Now, Stephanie Ross DeSimone and her daughter, who are respectively the widow and daughter of a naval commander killed during the 9/11 attacks, are suing. And they are suing because DeSimone's husband of 2 years, U.S. Navy Commander Patrick Dunn, was working at the Pentagon when American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the headquarters of the U.S. military. And the lawsuit, completely as expected, alleges that, quote, at all material times, Saudi Arabia, through its officials, officers, agents, and employees, provided material support and resources to Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. This document doesn't say how much money DeSimone is seeking in damages from Saudi Arabia. Everyone who listens to this show knows that I am not a war hawk. I am not a warmonger, but I want to step back just for a second here. If it's true that the Saudi government or senior Saudi officials are responsible for 9/11 in some way that is provable in court, then is the path forward really lawsuits from victims or actual actions against Saudi Arabia to dismantle what would effectively be proven to be a terrorist state? If you believe that the Saudis were responsible, even in part, even indirectly, for the 9/11 attack, isn't it an act of war against the United States? How are civil lawsuits the full extent to which this should be pursued? I don't know, Pat. Maybe I'm missing something. But to me, if we can actually demonstrate that Saudi Arabia was providing material support to the perpetrators of 9/11, all we're going to do is let a widow sue them civilly. It seems like not enough to me.
Yeah, it's not the right way to go. And if you remember last summer, there was a 28-page report.
Yeah.
I don't know which government agency put it out, but they concluded that the Saudi government did not take an active role in supporting Al-Qaeda, although they may have ignored fundraising deliberately.
That's right. This was this infamous 28 pages, which over the summer were partially unredacted, and they were relatively inconclusive. I mean, as Pat is saying here, they did not confirm definitive support, but at the same time, they didn't rule it out. And so now we have, via these lawsuits, the opportunity to actually look at the evidence and maybe come up with something more definitive. And I know that there are some neocons who have said, I don't remember if it was Michael Chertoff or who it was, who said, hey, forget about lawsuits. If Saudi Arabia was demonstrably supporting the eventual terrorists of the 9/11 attacks, that's an act of war, and just mere civil lawsuits are not sufficient. Send me your thoughts on that. I wonder how quickly I'll be called some kind of war hawk, which would be completely nuts, because you know that that's not at all what I am. Discuss this on our Reddit discussion forum, davidpakman.com/Reddit. That's REDDIT. We will take a break. Next, Canada making some really good decisions about the war on drugs and heroin use.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Joining me on the program today is Inga Fricklund, a former prosecutor and an executive board member of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, which is a nonprofit group of criminal justice professionals working to end the war on drugs. It's so great to speak to you, and we actually have something newsworthy to discuss here, which is that Canada has taken some major steps to end the war on heroin users. And we've been hearing so much about legislation and lobbying related to marijuana, particularly in the U.S., but this is really very major news. Let's start there. What exactly has Canada done?
Well, Canada has changed its Controlled Substances Act so that it's possible for a physician in a controlled setting to supply pharmaceutical grade injectable heroin to an addict for whom no other treatment has worked, it has to be done in a controlled setting. And it seems to be, fairly tightly circumscribed to make sure that everything is signed off and it is in a medical setting.
And when we talk about one of the main sort of impediments in the United States anyway, to when it comes to marijuana loosening laws, we often encounter this sort of vicious circle, which is, politicians say, I'm open to loosening the laws as soon as we have more research. But of course, the research is difficult to do because the laws are so tight. Has Canada experienced a sort of similar dynamic with heroin?
I don't know if the research is prohibited in the same way that it is here, but it's difficult. In reading some of the legislative history on this new act, it refers to a couple of studies that had been done. And they also looked at European experience, which of course has done research for a long time. So it's primarily the United States that takes this very emotional and restrictive attitude toward even gaining knowledge about drugs. It's a more put our head in the sands and pretend the problem doesn't exist.
When did you start to, I don't know if realize is the right word, but to really become increasingly concerned with the futility of the war on drugs in the U.S.? I know that you worked as a prosecutor in Cook County, and I've read that you've started to see the sort of racially disproportionate way in which the war on drugs was impacting people. But give us a sense of sort of your involvement directly in the war on drugs and how your views started to change.
This was back in the mid-1980s when I was a young prosecutor in Chicago. I spent a lot of time being assigned to the bond courts where people would come in, usually in the middle of the night when they were first arrested. And I would look at the rap sheets. Sometimes could be page after page of minor arrests and convictions, mostly for drugs. And then the new arrest would also be something drug related. I also noticed that a lot of the more serious cases, including murders, it turned out to be a fight over some drug territory. So it looked like drugs were driving a lot of our caseload. And at first I didn't give a whole lot of thought to it because I thought, hey, drugs are illegal, drugs are bad, these people were doing drugs, so we'll convict them. But maybe it was kind of like water dripping. It gradually sank in. First of all, I noticed that almost without exception, the defendants were black. Few Hispanics, virtually no whites. And even though we know that usage of drugs is pretty similar across racial groups, the drug laws were clearly falling much more heavily for some reason on minority communities. Second thing that got me thinking is that given the restrictions that many employers have, somebody with a rap sheet like this is never going to get a job in the legitimate economy. So essentially our convictions weren't solving whatever we thought the problem was, but it was digging people deeper into the drug economy. We made it so that they would never be able to get out. And sure enough, I would see these repeat customers, same people showing up week after week. We'd send them out. They went back to dealing drugs since that was probably their only option. And if they survived getting shot in the middle of some turf warfare, they'd be back again. So it looked as though we were locked almost in this dance that the prosecution, we did the same thing day after day. They did the same thing day after day, and nothing changed. No, except for things.
Did you see, were there any particular cases that stood out to you where you said, the big picture of this just makes absolutely no sense whatsoever? Aside from the sort of generalities that you talked about, were there specific cases that really impacted you?
I can't think of, there was such a similarity to the cases that, especially the ones involving marijuana, nothing really stood out. If anything, it was the sameness of it that got to me.
Yeah.
You know, the defendants were becoming this undifferentiated mass that were treated, with no interest or respect from the prosecution, that we just kept cycling through kind of mass production.
Yeah.
That steady drip, drip, drip. And then after I spent time in the prosecutor's office, then I moved on to doing some other things and didn't give the matter a whole lot more thought.
Well, one of
And
those
then-
other things that's fascinating to me is the time you spent in Helmand province in Afghanistan, which when we think about the war on drugs in the U.S., maybe for some of us, we see a connection to what's going on in Afghanistan, but many people maybe don't see that. I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Oh, well, my thoughts really started to crystallize beginning in 2004 when I first went to Afghanistan with the U.S. Agency for International Development. And between 2004 and 2014, I've been on the ground in Afghanistan for just about 5 years. So I have seen kind of the course of the war and how much worse and worse it's gone and what's happening with drugs. Early on, one of the things I remember is meetings at the U.S. Embassy of what agriculture programs could be developed to try to get Afghan farmers to grow something other than poppy.
Right.
And at one meeting at the embassy, I said, have we considered just legalizing drugs? The answer that I got was, that is not U.S. government policy, and you had better not bring it up again.
But it really gets to the heart of this issue, right? Which is that we are creating so much of what we claim to want to fix around the world by virtue of our drug policy in the United States.
Yes, and the whole poppy production in Afghanistan is driven by demand, actually more in Western Europe and Russia than in the U.S. We get ours from South and Central America. But the U.S. government there was treating it as a supply problem.
Right.
If we can only convince Afghan farmers to grow wheat, which pays them a 20th as much. But one of the things that struck me about that conversation, and something which very much bothers me about the whole war on drugs, is the intellectual dishonesty of it. If we're going to say it's our policy to have opium poppy be illegal, let's also take into consideration what are the inevitable consequences of that. There is going to be violence and corruption within Afghanistan. Now, we can't pretend that this war on drugs is costless. And the intellectual dishonesty of being unwilling to apply some logical analysis to the problem, just like the intellectual dishonesty of having marijuana be Schedule 1. The legal definition is highly addictive and no known medical use. Well, that's simply counterfactual.
I'm not one of the types that relies and points to the free market in all cases. In fact, quite the opposite. But I'm also just stunned when we ignore the fact, like in the example you gave of, hey, let's just convince these Afghani farmers to grow wheat instead of opium, instead of poppy. That ignores the market realities. And sometimes we actually do have to pay attention to them, don't we?
Oh, absolutely. And I remember once when I was living out at a small military base in eastern Afghanistan, which now seems to be ISIS territory, some young staffer from the embassy flew out from Kabul to give us all the word on the latest plans for the war on drugs. And I remember him saying, those greedy Afghan farmers, they would survive if they just grew wheat. But they want the money from the heroin. And when we are talking about Afghan farmers living in mud brick villages, statistically a quarter of their children are going to die before the age of 5. And we're talking about them being greedy. I just found that so offensive.
Yeah, no, it doesn't make sense on many, many levels. I wish we had more time. We have been speaking with Inga Frickland, former prosecutor and executive board member for Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. Thanks so much for talking to us both about what's happening in Canada with heroin, but also your experience. Absolutely fascinating.
It has been. Well, thanks for having me on.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I'm having a hard time thinking of a more anti-veteran, anti-military presidential candidate than Donald Trump. He's ridiculed John McCain for having been a prisoner of war during his military service. Trump has made it abundantly clear through this very odd pattern of non-donations and then very conspicuous donations to veterans groups that he sees donating to veterans merely as a political tool to be used as needed for his campaign. Donald Trump may be one of the most indifferent to veteran candidates that I can recall. Most recently, Donald Trump yesterday suggested to a room full of veterans that soldiers who come back from war suffering with PTSD are not strong and just couldn't handle it. This is something that Donald Trump said during a Q&A at what's called the Retired American Warriors PAC, Political Action Committee. Some of the questions were about the suicide epidemic in the military. Some of them were critiques of the Veterans Affairs Administration for falling short on providing veterans with the mental health that they need. And I'm going to play for you what Donald Trump said when asked about the issue of suicide and PTSD. And it's absolutely deplorable. I mean, this should uniquely and singularly make it so that not a single veteran or anyone who cares about veterans votes for Donald Trump. Listen to what he had to say.
When you talk about the mental health problems, when people come back from war and combat and they see things that maybe a lot of the folks in this room have seen many times over, and you're strong and you can handle it, but a lot of people can't handle it. And they see horror stories, they see events that you couldn't see in a movie, nobody would believe it. Now, we need a mental health help and medical.
Yeah, we need a mental health help and medical. Seriously, though, it's all about some soldiers are just strong enough and some soldiers aren't. What does that mean? Well, clear-thinking veterans are not happy with Trump. John Soltz, who's a veteran of the Iraq War and chairman of the Vote Vets organization, said that Trump's remarks are both horrible but not shocking. Clearly, Trump has set the bar very, very low during his campaign, going on to say, quote, "We're talking about a person in Trump who believes that POWs aren't real heroes," of course, referencing Donald Trump's comments about Senator John McCain. We interviewed Will Fisher yesterday on the program, and he went on to say he is an Iraq War veteran. He is a Purple Heart recipient, and he told BuzzFeed News about these comments. Trump's comments about veterans with PTSD reveal his total disdain for veterans and military families and highlight just how disconnected he is with our community. I miss the good old days when saying something like 47% of Americans are takers was enough to sink your campaign for good, as it happened to Mitt Romney. In 2016, apparently, you can say, and Trump has said, any number of heinously offensive things about groups that presumably we care about, right? Women, veterans, LGBT individuals, people who may be of a different religion or ethnicity. You can basically say whatever you want, and it doesn't end your campaign. And that is incredibly disturbing. Donald Trump's spokeswoman, Healy Baumgardner, has quit because she just can't handle the Donald Trump campaign anymore. Who cares? Why does it matter? Well, it matters because Healy is one of the most kooky and bizarre people who has worked for Trump during this campaign. And even she is seeing through the insanity of what is going on here. Now, as a reminder, Healy Baumgardner went into what I could only describe as a talking point coma, which went completely viral after we covered it. She's no longer comfortable with the Trump campaign and has resigned. Here is a quote from Ms. Baumgardner. "It is clear the campaign is now going in a direction I am no longer comfortable with, and I have decided to move on." Baumgardner has worked on 4 presidential campaigns. She says she still looks forward to, quote, "honorably casting my vote for Mr. Trump on election day." Many problems for the Trump campaign right now. He loses a debate embarrassingly, and then his damage control is even more embarrassing and ridiculous than the debate performance. He goes on a middle of the night Twitter rant about a sex tape involving a woman whose looks and weight he previously criticized. He's accused of doing illegal business in Cuba, which could hurt him big time in Florida. And then Kellyanne Conway goes on The View and basically admits that, yes, Donald Trump's business did spend money in Cuba, which would have been illegal. And then all of a sudden, it's too crazy for Healy Baumgardner. There is one thing that has sort of gone Donald Trump's way in the last few days. And I know that some people are going to laugh and they'll say, David, you're digging pretty damn deep here to find something positive to say about Trump. Remember how Trump said that in that first debate he had a faulty microphone? The debate commission put out a 1-sentence statement saying there were issues regarding Donald Trump's audio that affected the sound level in the debate hall. No mention of the sound level for the television broadcast, which was seen by 83 million people. That was absolutely fine. I still don't even know what they mean. Maybe what they mean is Trump's audio in the room to the few hundred people in the room was lower than Hillary Clinton's. I don't know. But Trump vindicated on maybe the most meaningless thing he's talked about over the last 2 weeks. And on all of the big issues, things still really not looking good. I will miss Healy Baumgardner. We still have Katrina Pearson. That's something, I guess. But Healy Baumgardner involved in, go back and check out the clip on our YouTube channel. It was a conversation about who Trump is meeting with. Why is Trump meeting with Henry Kissinger? Can she confirm the meeting? Can she not? She was a spokeswoman, but she said she doesn't speak on behalf of the Trump campaign. Well, hold on a second. That's exactly what a spokeswoman does. You are speaking on behalf of someone else. One of the funniest clips from this entire election cycle, and we bid farewell to Healy Baumgardner. If you have any questions about the show, if you have any comments about the show, we have a voicemail number, which is 219-2-DAVID-P. You can call that number anytime you want. If it's 3 a.m. and you're a presidential candidate, you probably shouldn't be tweeting about sex tapes. But if it's 3 a.m. and you're a viewer of the David Pakman Show, you absolutely should be calling 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a voicemail I received yesterday. Take a listen.
So what's up with doing the show from your spare bedroom? Boy, I bet the Patriot Mail on this one's going to be good. Keep up the good work. You have a great show, dude.
Yeah. This is a reference to yesterday I was doing the show on the road from Northampton, Massachusetts. It was not my spare bedroom. That was actually my mom's study. The David Pakman Show coming to you from my mom's study in Northampton, Massachusetts yesterday. But the audio was good. I have to tell you, Pat, I listened afterwards to my audio, and that mobile kit, it's really working pretty well, other than the clicking noise, which you and I have spoken about. People actually said when they listened to it, they thought I was here. When they watched, then they saw that I was somewhere else. But I'm pretty happy with the audio quality.
Yeah, we're going to be using that again in the future, too. So we have to make sure that we get that right.
Yes.
But I can vouch for him. He wasn't in his spare bedroom.
Right. That's because Pat was in my spare bedroom, just to verify that I wasn't there. That's where Pat was during yesterday's show. On today's bonus show, Leonardo DiCaprio, the actor, says climate change deniers should not hold public office. We're going to talk about that. The Florida Democratic Party has submitted nearly 500,000 voter registration forms, whereas the Republican Party of Florida has only submitted 59,000. What does this tell us about the early voting that is already happening in Florida? And WikiLeaks says they will be releasing documents relating to the U.S. election in Google over the next 10 weeks. What will that contain? We will discuss that and more on today's bonus show. The only way to sign up for membership and get instant access to the bonus show is by going to davidpakman.com/membership. This is viewer-supported media. And I encourage you to sign up, and I thank everybody sincerely who has signed up in the last couple of weeks.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.